Good morning, New Eden! Today is May 8th, 2022, and this is the Federation Frontline Report. I'm your host, Frozen Fallout, and today we will be reviewing faction warfare updates that were talked about at FanFest just a couple days ago, and we'll be doing that with Ashterothi. How's it going?
Greetings, my fellow Empyreans. I am Ashterothi, and I did not realize that CCP was planning on fitting polarized weapons to their FanFest.
Oh, that. Yeah, I'm ecstatic about what was talked about at FanFest. Reddit is of a different color than me right now. Well, maybe if you
Reddit is being Reddit. Yes, that's correct.
They went nuts, man. But I loved everything that they had to say, and I see a lot of what they're doing and a lot of their vision, and I really like it. How did you feel about FanFest?
Well, I sure did have a few criticisms, in particular about the way that things were presented. Mm-hmm. Things I would have done differently, because I feel like they had plenty of good stuff to talk about, but they didn't do a good job of selling it correctly, if that makes sense. Yes. But overall, I mean, like, I couldn't be happier with the content. Like, that's the thing. I even said this on day 2. It's like, as a person who's covering FanFest, I'm frustrated because I really wanted CCP to come out with something that would just shut everybody up, right?
Mm-hmm.
Would just like
say it in a way that would shut everybody up.
Right, prove us wrong, prove everybody wrong. You know, here's the content you guys been wanting. You know, whatever. That would have been great. At least something to make it so that like we could end this constant angst. But as an individual person, and as a faction warfare player, and as the guy who gets to explain the lore to everybody, it was the fucking golden ticket, right? Like,
yes,
it was pretty incredible.
And for a faction warfare podcast, I feel like I'm super ecstatic to hear that there was like some of the big stuff that they're talking about is faction warfare. That's going to be a big part of the living universe moving forward. And when I heard about that, I was like, oh, thank God, like finally more something. There is a little bit of story there. You know, they've done things in faction warfare, a lot of it in the Amar arena and Minmatar arena, but the one thing when they said the living team or the living universe team is going to be dedicating themselves to faction warfare for the next few years is something that I was blown away. I was like, yes, this is how they're going to actually deliver new content. This is how they're going to get new things into the game, because warfare should push the envelope of technology. You're needing to constantly innovate in order to beat your enemy. Why aren't there new ships that are coming out and new ways of taking space and new concepts of how to invade a planet and stuff like that? Like, you know, this is where a lot of content could come out of faction warfare, and I would love to see them use. Now, the one thing though, how do you feel about the allegiance system?
I love it. It is exactly what I would have wanted. Like, it's so basically the way it works is that right now, if you want to gain standings with the corporation, you have to go and either do things for that corporation or kill that corporation's enemies and therefore get derived standings, because you go down with them and you go up with the other side, right? Like, if you want to gain standings with the Triglavians, you have to go to Pochfin and kill Eden or Edencom systems and kill Edencom, rogue drones, and drifters. There's no other way. If you want to gain standings with Boundless Creation, you're going to go run missions for Boundless Creation, and that's specifically, right? Working in the faction warfare doesn't help you with Boundless Creation. With the Allegiance system, first of all, it may be easier to get faction standings for the first time ever. Yeah. But more importantly, by having it that I declare allegiance, now everything I do that is enacting the will or moving our agenda forward for my faction that I'm allegiant to is going to be worth credit, right? So now I don't know what it is that's going to be. Now, when I'm mining for the Federation. When I'm crafting things, I'm building ships for the Federation. I'm doing missions for the Federation. I'm taking plexes for the Federation. All these things are for the Federation, and I get credit for it, and the Federation gets credit for it for every action I do. The thing I like to think about is like, if you remember the Liberation Day games, when all the different tribes, there were different tasks that you could do, and then when you accumulated points, it didn't just accumulate points for you, it accumulated points for your chosen tribe, right? So you were not only like able to advance your own progress, but you were able to advance the Starkmanir or the Thucker or whatever. So in the same way, like the empires now can want different things at different times, and then we go about it, and then we get credit for it with them because of this, rather than just the static, go do missions, go do whatever. Which brings me to kind of what I was talking about right before we went live, but like what really we're seeing here is not like a faction warfare rework, right? Like we can't think of it that way. Like somebody's like, oh well, as long as they let you tax LP, I'm like, that is thinking so small ball right now, right? Like
this is opening it up to this is becoming a part of EVA, not a niche thing that if you're into PvP and you don't want, you know, like it's super, right now faction warfare is unbelievably niche. Like it's the most niche thing that they kind of have in the game right now.
Well, I mean, I don't know about that, but like either way, it is an activity, right? It's an activity. You go do it for glory, but more importantly, to just push button, receive bacon and plexus, right?
Right.
Well, so we're moving more towards the idea that the empires have a will of their own. They have objectives, they have desires, they have agendas, they have resources. And because of that, they're going to want to do things to each other and to the world. And faction warfare is the method by which the empires enact their will upon the universe, right? So and that's us. So whatever that means, that's what it's going to become. You know, when the Caldari want to specifically build structures in Blackrise, they're, you know, taking those systems and holding them will be important to the Caldari. What happens when the Amar invade Stain? You get what I'm saying? Like, you just break yourself completely free of the idea of like plexing and systems and system control and tiers. And it's like, is the Galente moving forward with their agenda in the universe? You know?
Right, yeah, exactly. It becomes a paramount amount of gameplay for everybody that anybody can get involved in, with just being connected to or having good enough standings and then making that choice and saying that I am going to make my allegiance to the Galente and now I'm fighting for the Galente. My one concern about this though is what's the point of a faction warfare corp?
I imagine that, so a corporation is defined by kind of what it's supposed to do. Like, what's the difference between a high-sec corp, right? What's the difference between a mining corp? So what they're doing and what sort of resources they have available. So, and with this heraldry system, right, we can now brand Aderon Robotics as the Galente Faction Warfare Group, and like all of our efforts and focus goes into that. But hopefully now Aderon can be actually moved into the Convocation of Empyreans because we no longer have to be two different entities.
Well, yeah, and so that's kind of the thing is that if it's much more about players declaring their allegiance, and it's I guess to a certain degree you're saying it kind of levels the playing field a little bit back to, because Faction Warfare Corp is a very specific niche thing that you have to be part of a Faction Warfare Corp, whether it's the NPC or a player-made corporation. It needs to be designated Faction Warfare for you to have to be part of this game. And now it just goes back to you. What's important about your corp is not whether you're in faction warfare or not at all. That doesn't necessarily come into a factor. What comes into a factor is whether you have good logistics, you have good gameplay, good ideas, people working together. Do you have all the tools for that other corporations are giving, and how do you give those tools, and what did you build your culture around?
Right. So another example, or like to think about it a different way, Pi is a member of the Amar faction warfare, regardless of whether or not they're spinning plexes or even in the militia, right? Electus Matari, is part of the Mimitar, faction war because they are the military might of the Mimitar, as Capsuleers, regardless of whether or not they happen to currently be engaged in the actual mechanics of faction warfare. We're decoupling that, right? Like you can declare your allegiance to the Glente, and it's not just completely constricting to a binary of like, okay, well now I go to Lowsec and I run plexes and I do this thing, right? It's going to be more fluid.
It should open up faction warfare, or the concept of it, like you were saying, it's no longer just this one little chunk of space anymore either. It could open up to everything. It can be...
Right, so you're not going to have a Galente faction warfare corp. You're going to have a Galente loyalist corp.
Right. So yeah, I find that's going to be very interesting. I wonder if there are going to be some kind of perks though for being a Galente, or a faction warfare corporation itself. Do you get to like tax LP that normally you wouldn't, or are you able to declare allegiance as a corporation or as an alliance? Is it just going to be allegiances for individuals?
Well, I said earlier that like taxing LP is thinking too small. I will say that CCB Ratati, in his like Living Universe discussion, I think it was, he like makes this offhanded comment that was so huge. Like I rewind it and I listened to it. Like he buried the lead in the first half of a sentence. He's like, if you can tax LP, then you can just tax Interbus points. I'm like, whoa, go back to that. You can tax LP. Come on. Let's talk more about that idea, right? So like, I think that the idea of like a corporation that has a focus is still going to be rewarding, you know?
Mm-hmm. No, and that's something that I hope to see more of. I'm really, really down for the allegiance system though, and I think the one thing that kind of scares me is that it's like, man, now I kind of feel like I want to go back to one of the bigger alliances and corporations that have these crazy cool communities and get back into them more, while being just declaring allegiance to Galente, because I'm always going to just live in Lowsec, but I don't know, I've stepped away from bigger corporations and stuff like that in order just to be, because you have to be so focused on faction warfare if you're doing faction warfare, it feels like.
And there's a gut reaction that's like, oh my god, but what about all the faction warfare corps or whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
But what I hear by what you just described is that you're not getting to do what you want right now, right? If you were given the opportunity, you would do it a different way.
And yeah, and that's the thing, is that to a certain degree, for sure, it's if you get into faction warfare, you're locking yourself down in a lot of different regards than what you normally would see coming into you, which is why it's hard pressed. As much as before the allegiance system concept, it's like, yeah, we want to get newbies into faction warfare, but then you're also like, you're driving them into some very small niche way of doing PvP that's very different than the rest of the universe, and doesn't really, and kind of shackles them down, I feel like, to a certain degree. Whereas if you're going to be doing the allegiance system, you can funnel players right into it. Like, that's going to be one of the first, obviously they're going to be like, here you go, sign up for one of the allegiances if you want. It's not going to hurt you in the sense of you can't join a corporation or you can't join an alliance because you are part of this faction warfare type thing that you've been doing and you've wanted to do.
Right. And most people will probably have an allegiance, even if they don't like go to Lowsec and run plexes or whatever.
Right.
You're still going to want to declare an allegiance, so that way the shit that you do gets rewarded by the empire that you're allegiant to.
Yep, and I wonder how much restrictions are they going to put on you for declaring allegiance? Are you locked out of Caldari space just because you've declared allegiance to the Galente.
It doesn't seem so, but it does seem like you might be able to get your standings tanked or whatever, but they did say like things reset if you try to switch, because they want to discourage people from just swapping war zones over and over again.
That was another thing too, was the abuse of the ability to jump around. So the ability to not do that, by resetting it, that's a pretty important aspect of not allowing people to be very extremely abuseful. Which the current system already, as long as you're willing to shackle in a character into faction warfare, you can jump all over the place, because there's ways of doing stuff without really tanking your standings on any side, and you can be close to everybody, and then whoever has tier 5 or tier 4 or tier 3 or whatever the highest is out there in the land today will always jump onto that boat.
Yeah, and speaking of like ability, man, like Aurora's ability to just say all of the right words was just so impressive. Like on topic after topic, her articulation of what was wrong was probably the best articulation of a problem that I've ever heard from a CCP. Like at the very least, I walked away from that thinking that like she fully understands like every single aspects of it that I would be interested in her understanding. You know what I mean? Like she was able to properly communicate like what was not just what was happening, but what was wrong with it. You know what I mean?
Yep. Yeah, no, I agree 100%. Let's go ahead and talk about some of the other things that were kind of brought up here, because we've talked about this on our show before, is the idea of front lines.
Yeah.
I really loved that they brought this kind of thing in, and I was watching I didn't get to watch all of it, and I need to go back, and I'm sure this will be something we can probably be talking about for multiple episodes moving forward. So as I dig more in and we get more information revealed, we'll definitely have lots to talk about here, but this is one of the things at the roundtable that they were talking about, is this is how they want to help smash as much of the problem when it comes to the roaches that are out there. Stealing that word from Ashterothi here, because I love it. And the people who are just out here to plex, to, no matter how they're doing their plexing, whether it's just sitting AFK or possibly using other methods that are illegal in order to get their LP stored for them. There's a lot of it in faction warfare, and if you funnel everybody into 5 or 6 or 7 systems, I think that's going to be a lot better. Roach is totally a better. I was like, as soon as
live in the shadows and feed off of what the work of other people. Absolutely, yeah. No, I've always referred to them as that, because here it goes back to a notion that I actually tweeted about the other day, which is that like ultimately the problem isn't bots. The problem is that the activities are so basic that a human being becomes indistinguishable from a bot.
Yes.
That is a problem.
That's huge. Yeah, and I have that a lot where I'm like, I don't know if this guy's a bot, but man.
Right. And like, so if players are encouraged to behave in a way that is indistinguishable from a basic bot, then chances are something needs to change, right? Like, I mean, that's the real sign of a problem, not the bots themselves. So yeah, cockroaches existed before the Plex botters even were a big thing. However, like, yeah, the idea of the front line, the idea that the back lines provide no benefit, like, to the person who's doing it.
The wallet itself, and it's that it's going to be a longer trek to even flip that system.
It has an intense advantage tactically, obviously, right? Like, if every system that's adjacent to an enemy system is a front line, then if you can go and gain a system that's like 5 jumps in, suddenly that entire area becomes front lines. Everything it's adjacent to becomes front lines. Like, let's say if we are holding like the entire south, and the front line is somewhere around like Nenemelia and Tama, and you know what I mean. Like, we've held the south, they've held the north. So we have this nice area all around, Fleet, Devon, Integral, all that stuff is like super safe right now, right? Because it's way away from the front line. So we're like, this is cool. And then they flip Hadley's. Well, now Aboon is a front line. Now Fleet is a front line. Now Integral is a front line. Now Old Man Star is a front line. But that won't happen by accident, right? It won't happen because some people were min-maxing the profit. It'll happen because the Caldari who are fighting this war and are getting frustrated at the front line has decided that the best thing that they can do is strike right there and cause chaos. That's a tactical decision. That's, like, more than anything else, has me excited. In the military they talk about, like, flashbacks and stuff. And then obviously a lot of those are bad. But, like, every once in a while, like, certain pieces of my old training, like, kick back in. And when she started to describe the whole frontline system, I suddenly, like, it just clicked in my head. The fact that, like, so you have your rear guard, right? And then you have an operation that we want to do, So we want to do an operation in Fallujah. Well, most of our forces are in Baghdad, so that's our back line. We have that very secure. We need to be able to project into Fallujah. So we're going to go to Tikrit, or Al-Qut, and establish ourselves there, so that way that can be our command and control center to then strike into Fallujah. So now we've moved up our command and control, and that is adjacent to the front line, but not on the front line, obviously. So then you have your front line, you have your command and control behind that, and then you've got your supply lines behind that. And that's, like, literally how wars are fought.
Mm-hmm.
That's actually how it works.
This is a beautiful way of creating a much more engaging war. Right now, it's a lot of just there are flashpoints, Fleet, any of the Caldari major systems, a lot of systems are you have to actually assault in order to get. But then there's just this random, like, barroom brawls that are happening across the Black Rise area and all the other faction warfare areas that they're just weird, like, encounters with each other, and mostly people just trying to make money, and really just a bunch of mining, around that's, mining of flexes that are happening, and just trying to find the safest little area. And this just forces all of us to have an area that this is where the fighting is, this is where people are trying to exist, and it varies and changes. It's something that I'm really looking forward to, being like, every week I'll be able to be like, okay, these are the frontline systems, these are the percentages, because I can do that to a small degree here that we have right now, but it doesn't follow as much of that kind of easily understood and easily digested and
quick adventure, in and out, 20 minutes.
Yeah.
So, and this is one of the things that I remember talking about. Like, so back when we did the last major roundtable for faction warfare, I think it was like Yintan put it on, I think it was. Anywho, we were talking about it, and, like, two big ideas emerged, right? One was the idea of front lines, right? You can only take a system that is adjacent to a system you already own or whatever. And then mine was campaigns.
Mm-hmm.
The idea, because I come from the golden days of faction warfare, where you would have proper sieges, right? Like 4 to 5 days of just non-stop 30-man fleets just slamming Punishers into it. We have attrition fits because we bought every single small railgun in the fucking market, right? Like in Jeddah, you just can't get them anymore. We have, we're designing new strategies, because with that many people on field, it, like, nothing matters anymore. You know what I mean? Like, so, that in those scenarios, that's where you really get this situations where, like, station lockout becomes a really critical thing, which is why structures were so disruptive to faction warfare back in the day. But this idea of campaigns, like, you know, for those of us who had seen the Days of the Sieges, like, that's it. That's peak faction warfare. But like, you have to make them whole cloth, and you could. But the other piece of it was, I was taken aback, and I was actually kind of surprised by how many people at that presentation were not. They wanted to be told what to do by the empires, and it made sense to me once I thought about it, because like, in a universe that is a sandbox, you can do anything. You can go join a null block and go like you can go try to solo it. You can make your own wormhole, whatever you want to do to establish who you are. This is the class of people who have voluntarily said, I want to work for the empires. They have self-selected themselves as RPers. That's what it should be for, right? In fact, the thing that really struck me was they're asking for less rewards. They wanted less. They wanted no more things that actually could be sold for ISK, and they actually wanted to reduce these things, because the people in faction warfare don't need that much money for what they're doing. But with it being so lucrative, it made it so that all these abusive tactics were brought in, and all these outsiders were, come in. That it matters about how much ISK you can make rather than who's in control, which is what they really wanted, right? So they wanted less ISK, more uniforms and titles and medals and stuff, right? So, like, I think that the idea that, like, and look at Edencom and the Triglavians, right? The problem with Edencom wasn't content. I mean, like, they actually technically had content, and, you know, when things were going, they were having a good old time. It was that they got left high and dry. They never got any commands. They never got any more direction. The Triglavian, even the Clades have, like, felt a lot really listless. The biggest complaint is like, hey, we're here to do what they ask. We're here to be part of this bigger thing. Let us be part of it.
Right.
And
we need
I
a
think
back
that
and forth here. A talk, you know, like a
right.
We did this. You say whether that was shit or good, and what do we do now? You, like, you know, keep on moving this, you know, creating an actual living universe that, you know, it's not just missions that you can go out and just, you know, okay, the newbie goes out and gets to participate in all the stuff that everybody else did. As long as he levels up, you'll go, like, there's events that you'll never be able to take part of in EVE, and that's one of the beautiful things, I think, that is really unique to kind of EVE, and how this really is, like, the Triglavians taking away stations, World War B, you know, whether it's NPCs or PCs doing stuff, there needs to be events that are happening in the world that if you don't take part of it, then you'll never be part of it. That you had to say,
there are things that are happening. There are things that happened. They don't happen again. They happened. The Empress was coronated. That happened. You know, it's not going to. Well, I mean, it won't happen again to this particular Empress. You know what I mean? So, like, yeah, absolutely. And I think that that's the whole point, right? Like, one of the biggest things that bothers me, actually, the argument that bothers me the most that I've been seeing around town, is this idea that this somehow makes it less of a sandbox.
I've been seeing that too, and that's something that's like, what? Wait, what?
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about this, okay? So, a theme park versus a sandbox. A theme park is when an MMO has pre-built stories for you to go on, you know, dungeons or quests and all that kind of stuff. Anytime that the game itself is about the content that the developers have made and you experiencing it online, then it is a theme park. You go on your rides and you collect your prizes, right?
Yep.
A sandbox MMO is an MMO in which the players are empowered to affect the universe and each other in it, right? So the ability to put up permanent things that other people can interact with, the ability to destroy other people's stuff, the essence of, like, non-consensual PvP is absolutely essential to the idea of a sandbox, because it's about freedom, right?
Yep.
One of the things is that, like, these two ideas are not mutually exclusive, and I think that they are often presented that way. And secondly, pure sandbox MMOs are awful and do awful, like across the board.
If it's pure sandbox, or you don't, if you didn't allow for the company to build some sandcastles first, at the very least, and maybe reinforce those so that they don't get busted down by players as soon as they come in, you're just basically you're opening up a huge world into saying people go and do whatever the hell you want.
So like what happened in EVE Online is not unusual. In almost every MMO that is near to sandbox, that has territory or has things that people will want to go do or have, then it emerges a massively powerful player organization that makes sure that nobody else besides them can do anything, right? There's always a winner, right? And it makes sense, right? Because there's always a snowball effect. The people who can control the resource have the resource, which gives them advantage, so then they become more and more and more dominant. This happens all the time. But the other part of it is that, like, sandboxes also have this concept of, like, you can do whatever you want. And I really, really appreciate Josh Strife-Hayes' call out on this idea, because that doesn't exist. There are no games where you can do whatever you want.
Mm-hmm.
There's no games anywhere. The way that you can always do what the developer has made it so that you can do explicitly, right? You can't just do whatever you want.
Working within a framework,
exactly. If the developer didn't predict that you would want to do it, you can't. So it's not totally free. So the problem is that when we tell somebody that they can do what we want, whatever they want, in a world that isn't actually true, because there's all kinds of constrictions based on what the developer has and hasn't built, then we're just not answering the person. We're just not giving them any direction at all, right? So if you have a catalyst, if you say, well, it'd be a good idea to go, as it turns out, the dragon's attacking, and we need heroes to go help save the maidens. And in a theme park, you basically hit OK and you go and do that, and that's basically it. In a sandbox, that same event can happen as long as you can then go, nah, I'm gonna go over here and do some, right? Like, that's the difference. So having things happen in a universe outside of us isn't making it not a sandbox. It's just making the sandbox interesting.
It's making it alive. I mean, the idea of the living universe, because if there's not enough players in order to, maybe if we had the 8 billion people on Earth all playing EVE, it might be a little bit less, but even then, you'd still want to have events that the developers are building.
That doesn't make any difference to me, because so you know what stories need? Catalysts. Right?
Yep.
If you give somebody an idea of what they could do, they have the choice to accept or reject it. But if you do not present the idea to them, they don't have the choice to accept it, right?
Mm-hmm.
In this case, the Deathless can call for us to help against Sorrow. We can choose to help him. We can choose to stay with Sorrow. We can choose to ignore the whole freaking thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the thing is that right now we talk about how this is a sandbox and we live in it, and it's like a living sci-fi universe and whatever, but ultimately it's very static and very dead. It doesn't matter how many missions you do this day, the same exact corporations will be in exactly the same places. The rocks will be roughly where they are. Nothing, no matter how hard the Caldari win in faction warfare or the Glente win, it doesn't actually change how the empires actually go on any given day.
Right, the inability to actually
nothing actually reacts to what you're doing.
Right,
there's no history.
Yeah. If you're just walking down the street and it doesn't matter, what you do to the NPCs, like the next day when you wake up, they're all just gonna do and act the same way anyways. Like your ability to actually influence the sandbox, that is a problem.
But as soon as those NPCs want something, now how I interact with it will affect things, will create a story, will create, build your legend, as they used to say for EVE Online, right? Like sure, the player run stuff, the exclusively player run stuff, whole cloth, is very cool. The fact that a lot of people are willing to go to war for the Mittani, super whatever, cool. But there's also people that want to band together to work for the Gallente. And though that is a valid interaction with the universe, the universe exists outside of us. We want to be immersed in a universe. I don't want a game that's just fucking numbers. I don't want to be able to look on Dotland to find out exactly what kind of things go in a specific place, right? I want to have to go look at the news to find out what's going on in a specific place.
Yes.
I want to feel like the universe would exist without me, because only then does my existence in that universe carry meaning.
Right. Yeah, because eventually you're not going to be playing this game one way or another, like.
No. What I mean by that is, if you could take me out of the equation and things would play out, then introducing me into the equation can induce change and have effect.
Yes. Okay. Yep. I see what you're saying.
The situation would have to be able to play out. Like whenever I play D&D, like when I DM and I make my own campaigns, what I do is I think about how it would play out if the adventurers didn't show up.
Right. Yes.
What did the enemies expect things to do? And then as the players interact with that story, they divert it in big and small ways off of that path. And the enemies react accordingly based on their resources. So that's what I mean by that. So if the universe, if you took out all of the players and it still played a game of Stellaris with NPCs against each other, then when you reintroduce all those players, everything we do influences that shit in like a butterfly effect.
Yeah, changes now everything.
Who cares? Who cares? You're just ratting.
Yep. No, and that is a really good point. If you took all the players out of EVE, is there a story that is playing out? And it feels more and more like there is.
Right.
And the more
and
that
this
we
isn't
can
a zero...
introduce elements where we can affect that story just by existing, and more of how much more passion we have to try and fix and be part of that story, I think, and this seems to be some avenues that they're making for us to be able to do that.
Right. And this isn't a zero-sum game, guys, right? Like, a good PvE doesn't somehow make PvP worse, right? Like, there's this weird notion that if, like, CCP can't, like, if EVE Online had a really good PvE universe that was, like, interactable and, like, a living, like, actually had, like, not just make it now. We're not talking about patching it now, but, like, just imagine EVE Online was a game with a living sci-fi universe side of things too, where all the players can do everything that they can do right now, but there also was like tons of cool ways of interacting with the empires and pirates and stuff. Like, that wouldn't make the game worse, right? If there was a big population of the game that only played it for PvE, that wouldn't make the game worse. It wouldn't make your game worse. In fact, having good quality PvE is what attracts people and keeps them in long enough for them to gain a sense of mastery enough, to gain comfort enough to take on the step and to become invested, right? So a good PvE makes a good PvP. Not a bad PvE makes it so that people don't actually even make it to that point.
Right, yeah. Yeah, and it also, that's one of the big things is like this is not taking away from the sandbox. This is adding to the sandbox. They're not right, limiting anybody in their ability to do all the shit that is out in 0.0. And to the people that are all like, well, well, I guess they just don't care about the stories that are happening. And no, those are great too. The stories that are happening in 0.0 that are all 100% player made and stuff, CCP is going to be just as happy to talk about and do those things. That I don't understand how, like an event, for example, like the Triglavian event, if anybody believes that took away from the sandbox, I don't understand what you're saying. Like,
yeah,
all it did was add to the sandbox. Now, you might be disagreement of what they added to the sandbox, but there was a bunch of people in 0.0, and myself included here in LowSec, that really didn't fuck around or care about that shit until, like, all of a sudden I was like, shit, there's a lot more jumps to Mar now. and there's what happened to my back door into Nenemalia that was into the Caldari space from Akadagi. And I was like, well,
yeah, well, and
all
the
of a
thing
sudden
is that,
everything
like,
changed. And I didn't get to participate in that shit. It pisses me off that I fucked up and didn't do that shit.
well, there are things changing all the time that influence your game. It's just whether or not you notice them. You
Yep.
know? But so there was a term that I coined a while back when I was first thinking about this whole problem, which I just called the playground. Right? Like, a playground has things to do. It has a swing set and a seesaw and a merry-go-round and all this cool stuff. And it also has a big sandbox to play in, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, the fact that the playground has swings doesn't make the sandbox any less cool, but
Right,
it does
and
make the entire
sometimes-
park better.
I don't know if you've been to parks like this. Sometimes the sandbox is the playground area. Like, a huge amount
true.
of the playground area is just sand that you can go and do sand building stuff if you want to. It's like a beach, like.
Right. But in my opinion, we haven't actually even really been playing with, like, the sand is out of the sandbox already, in my opinion. Like, in the early days, the empires that players built were actually built on NPC stuff. They wanted to engage with the lore and they wanted their stories to be tied in with the stories of the universe. This idea that, like, players are the only thing important, divorced completely from the stories of the universe, is a relatively new phenomenon. And, like, in my opinion, that's what makes it dead. Having all of these different characters and having all these different things in the universe that I can affect and change by interacting with it, that sounds like sand, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, plopping down a pre-made thing because you bought it and you brought it in, or you built it or whatever, that's not building a sandcastle. That's bringing in your toys into a box and, like, laying them out and smashing them into your friends.
Yeah, that's very good.
Sculpting the universe through your interactions. That's living in a sandbox. And I feel like this is a lot closer to that.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I mean, Vash does point out that the Abyssal stuff is still, controversial to a lot of people, and some of the stuff that they have added that I do feel like Abyssal is a weird one with the, like, jumping out of the sandbox to a small degree. Like, there's no way to fuck with these people because they're in
Well, I mean, you can catch them when they're on the way out.
But yeah, it is, and actually I have to deal with that, which is actually kind of one of those things. Like, I'm a pirate. If I want to do Abyssal, I have to do it in LowSec with my pirate character. And I am way more in danger of getting blown the living shit out of if I want to try doing. And I'm penalized for the choices that I've made in my game in order to...
I'm just going to head this off right now. I will say that they really desperately, and like a month ago, need to implement that you can no longer run the Abyss in systems that you can't anchor anything in. That's just not okay. You can't. That breaks it.
Interesting.
Without that, we're fine. Because there was this balance that happened, because basically when Abyss first came out, it was determined that, like, somebody could just jump back into the Abyss before somebody could actually kill them, and so that you couldn't actually kill somebody if you wanted to, if they were prepared to just jump into the Abyss for the rest of the day. But then it was discovered that you could go up to the trace and anchor an MTU or a mobile depot or something like that, right next to the trace.
Yes, okay.
And it forced them to not be able to jump back down. Play and counterplay.
Yep.
So then they bring cloaked orcas and you bring bigger ganker. That is play and counterplay. As soon as you're able to do the abyss somewhere where things can't be anchored, you've completely removed that and undermined the thing. Like the abyss actually is very careful in how like it plays with the sandbox in many ways. You have to you're exposed on your way out. In a similar way, there's a lot of sites that you're pretty much only exposed on your way in, so but everything about the abyss, or sorry, the over half of the value of everything in the abyss is completely player dependent. In other words, part of the market in sandbox.
Mm-hmm.
And the other half of it is does require interaction with the sandbox because it's not a direct payout, it's red loot, right?
Yep.
So by that same logic, I could say that like having ratting without having direct bounty payouts is against the sandbox because I can't interrupt your ability to get the money. Like you can kill my ship and take my money.
Interesting. That's a good point. Very good point.
And a lot of those people are also completely being dismissive of the fact that like the abyss is a challenge, right?
And
like,
it is a huge challenge.
And
I get my ass handed to me every time I try to go into the abyss.
the problem is a matter of focus, right? Anytime that you can allow players to interact with you, you're basically telling the person who's doing the activity that you must also keep track of DScan, right? And so that severely limits how much attention they demand by basically, because so they're not protecting you, because you could always have your trace probe down in the same way. You say combat probes, well, how do you get the normal things? Oh, you can't warp to the anom, so it's a combat signature. Cool.
You just have to wait a little bit longer.
Yeah, but
they're gonna be here in 15 minutes or they're dead anyways. So.
Yeah, well, or the trace disappears and you're like, oh, never mind. But my point is that like, so to the person inside, like the threat of interaction from other people is just the same as in anything else. But now they actually don't get descan because you can't see outside of your abyss trace.
You're even more popping out into the unknown. That's a good point.
Right, those are really good points. There's a promise. During this 20 minutes, I'm going to test you, or I'm going to protect you. You don't have to worry about descan. Just close it. It's fine. You don't have to worry about local. Close it. It's fine. For this 20 minutes, you're mine. That's what the abyss says.
It's a great way of thinking about it, and kind of I would have to say that I've slightly attuned my way of thinking with the abyss much more. Just in this little conversation about it has really improved the way that I've looked at the abyss for sure. And it is similar. Vash kind of points out that it's kind of similar to wormholes, where being able to close yourself off but then there's counterplay and play that all is involved with the idea of being able to close off your wormhole.
Right, but that doesn't stop somebody from already being inside. Exactly. And it's also pointed out that a lot of the sites that do lock out, somebody could already have their own. But I'm sure that there are at least some sites that like it's difficult, if not impossible, for that to be true. Yeah. But my point is that when for instance the new SEC sites with a lockout, right? Mm-hmm. Once you got the Marauders in there, the thing is that like it's even safer than the Abyss, because the Abyss comes out in a single known point. When I'm leaving a site, I get to decide where I warp to.
Yeah, and sometimes that's to basically perfect safety, depending on where it's at.
Yeah. Well, you can't ensure, like, a single person can't make sure that they grab me. You can't be at all the gates.
Right. Yep. But yeah, I think that this kind of leads in kind of naturally, though, to talking about the idea of like objectives and stuff that they're going to be putting out into faction warfare. And that's so one of the things that they'd said was like the idea of like an objective will be take this system, or at least push the front line to that system was one of the examples that they gave. And I really like that kind of like, if they can put out special objectives, special things for us to like target, and why the Empire wants to hold these things, or why the Galente want Intaki to be under their control if they lose it. These can add to the story and just really build on to a lot of the stuff that and just add to the sandbox to get us to do stuff inside of the sandbox that we're not doing right now, to be honest.
Yeah, and the good news is that CCP has been experimenting with this for a few years now. You know, the World News has been, or the New Eden News, I guess now, has been focused on faction warfare quite a bit, and more importantly, establishing key places of interest, right? Like we have Intaki, Ugalis, the Pregular constellation, and all that sort of stuff. And then there's other areas too that are talked about at various times. And then of course, you know, on the Amar side, it's way more clear. You've got like Fortress Asset, and you've got Flossiswin, and you've got, you know what I mean? Like that's where the hot is. And so every time those systems flip, it means something to everybody, right?
Yes.
Like there's a headline about it, and it makes lasting impact, because every, you know, again, the NPCs have an agenda, but if you when we lost Intaki, the Celis Agard's agenda was pretty much thwarted. Like they had to bring in neutral parties in order to negotiate it, because we no longer could prove that we could secure it. Like that actually happened. So like these things are happening, but they're not visible enough because they're not built into the game, because the game doesn't have the systems to reflect it yet. But if they were to have those systems,
that's the key, is being able to see that it's going on. A new player jumping in can be like, oh, hey, Intaki is a really important system.
What if when you jump into Intaki, you got like a little thing that pops up, like comlink, you know, request, and like when you click on it, it like opens up, and you know the one of the people from the Intaki assembly is like, you know, help, blah 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 is happening, like informs you of what's going on in the system and why it's important as you're going around. You know?
That would be next level stuff. Like that's
what if when you jump into a set, you get a communique from, you know, Merilith or whoever it is, Sorum, that's like, you know, you are in sovereign imperial territory, you know, state your business or get out or whatever, you know, like you can draw people into the fact, you can clue people into the fact that there's something interesting going on in a diegetic way.
Yeah. No, that would be awesome. I'm really
diegetic,
interested.
by the way, means in context, right? Like for instance, you know, in a play, you've got lights above the play that like lights the whole stage, but then, you know, maybe you have like an actual lamp that's on. Well, the light off of the lamp is diegetic light, whereas the light from like the offset stuff is just normal set light.
Nice.
Or like you know what, in like a TV show, when they're listening to, like when a song's playing and then it like shifts over and it's clear that there's like a radio that's playing that song, that's diegetic.
So what are you, if you had to guess, what do you think, how long do you think it'll be before we'll see some of these changes coming? I got the impression, the feeling that it would be at the end of 2022 personally. That it would be along with an expansion that'll be coming out.
The Q4 expansion, I assume that, so I don't know how big the arcs are, first of all. You know, so it could very well be that we're rounding about the end of the current arc, in the climax of the formation of this new pirate faction and the release of the new pirate faction, or like the beginning of the development of the new pirate faction shipline, right? And then they shift over to the next arc that then would like wind up in the Q4 expansion. But either way, you know, I don't know if they're going to touch on faction warfare before then, but it seems pretty clear that the no later than the Q4 expansion for a lot of it. That being said, you know, they were very clear, and I know for a fact that it's true, that it's still very early days for this stuff. So while thankfully they have like a lot of the tools already built, so once everybody figures out what it is that we want to do, it shouldn't take very long to actually like do it. So I wouldn't suggest it would take years. It's also not going to come out in the next couple of months. So
yep. And so
I
anybody
imagine
that was hoping that it was going to be at the next update, what, in a few days from now, isn't it?
Yeah, that was me.
I was really hoping as well.
I mean, it makes sense to me, but like I get happening. I get it, and the thing is, somebody on Reddit actually got it right, although the conclusions off of it were kind of weird. But like, in the end, what CCP Paradox said, or Paragon said, was they're going to announce the largest content, right? Like, I had the assumption that like they would have it to be ready, and I really do push on CCP Dragon on this during our interview that I just put on YouTube, because it was really frustrating to me, right? Like, wait, why don't you have anything to show for it? What have you been doing? And ultimately, like, it boils down to, and they're standing pretty firm with the fact that it's just that much foundations had to be made, right? Like, new content wasn't built because they had to get their house in order first. But now the house is in order, and so rather than saying like, this is what we have for you, it's like, all right guys, roll up the garage door, we're open for business again, let's start talking about what we're going to build. When we're like, what have they already built? And we were also like confused, like, why aren't they talking to us about it? Well, they weren't talking to us about it because they weren't ready to start talking to us about it. And now that they are, like, the floodgates have been opened. They're able to talk about things. They're able to share information about stuff, and we're able to build that future. But now we have to build it, right? Mm-hmm. So rather than this being the big release, it's more like the grand reopening of the shop, right? So, and that's good. That's fine. I'm okay with this.
Yeah, and I'm kind of hoping
if I can get a snake hat, all else is forgiven.
Speaking of graphical kind of stuff, they did announce a lot of graphic cool stuff. That I'm not going to get really into the specifics of it, but I have to say, like, the new holographic stuff for the ships looks really cool. Like,
just mind blowing.
Like, if you
just
mind. Killing somebody is huge. Like, that's like, getting a kill mark is such this like minor aesthetic thing you can't see right now, and they're planning on making it look like this, like, hey, if you're killing people, you're gonna have all this shit around you that's like, yeah, I murdered all day long.
Well, it forms around your ship too, so like as soon as it dies, you'll see exactly who it was that got the kill, because they'll get the cool effect.
Yeah.
But one of the things I thought about with this, I haven't really talked about this anywhere else, but when I saw that, I was like, oh, this is why they can't rely on skins 100% anymore. Because why the hell would you care about your skin when you can customize your holograms around it? Like, this Snake Hat makes it so that I don't need to worry about how fancy, I just need the Vexor to be green at that point,
It's well, the other thing that I thought was really interesting was the idea of, like, a different module will make your ship look different. So if you put
the idea of like
these armor plates on, you'll get like more armor plating on the, like, that'll start appearing visually on your ship. I thought that was like, wow, okay, we're starting to move into
something. I mean, like,
extensions, right? Extension system. Is what
it's nothing terribly new though, right? Like, it's just a continuation of something. It used to be that they were continually trying to do this kind of stuff, right? I mean, we have, we can see individual turrets, right?
Yep.
You can see individual launchers. Those actually got renovated. It used to be that when you launched a missile, it was a single point, and now you can see every single missile.
Yeah,
you can now
so
see
beautiful now.
Where the damage is on the shields. You can watch the nanites repair your armor, right? Like, they're constantly trying to make it so that, like, what's happening is reflected visually. That being said, this looks like a particularly cool one. Like, this really feels like it could be like the end all, right? Where every ship looks just a little bit different, and you can tell visually stuff about it more than just the guns. Or more importantly, imagine if you're in a fleet and there's like 30 Vexers, and you could at a glance see if somebody was in a different fit.
Yeah.
Because every other person is identical, right? Identical Vexers, and then one is like this. One of these things is not like the other.
Yep. Yeah.
I actually think that's really cool.
I'm really excited for a lot of the stuff, like Upwell structure skins. Like, finally, that's awesome.
Oh my god! I just realized something. I'm gonna do inspections. All right, everybody has to undock. No, everybody has to undock, and I'm gonna fleet formation warp us in a square formation to a location, and everybody has to sit in their position, and we go down and look at everybody while they're all dressed right. Join Naderon Robotics. We have fun here.
Oh man, that is awesome. Yeah, no, I think that the updating of all the graphics, reflective surfaces, being like the hangar changes that they're making, like if we can see other players. No, they didn't say anything about walking in stations, did they? Did I miss it?
No.
At some point.
So I had started to think that they were still working on something in engine, but I was really confused by that because like it seemed like a parallel effort, but it also seemed like the scope stuff was built separate.
Mm-hmm.
But then they accidentally made a boo-boo on one of the latest scope videos that they came out with, and then they straight up said it at FanFest that yes, the animations are done in Unreal. So chances are, if we're getting out of our if we're going to be walking around in the areas of New Eden, it will be in the shooter.
Interesting. I wonder, yeah, I don't know. There was one thought process that I kind of had on this is like, what if like the shooter was just part of Eve? That'd justify some things that would be interesting. That like,
what if they're porting the entire client over to Unreal? But the problem with that is that like, if they were doing that, then they wouldn't have put so much effort into porting it, making it 64-bit client and all that other stuff, right? Like, you would have just been porting it over to Unreal. So,
well, I mean, you can still have it be a separate server, separate code, everything. You just, use your same character name. You just jump out of your ship, and all of a sudden you're using. Well, I guess the code in your game probably can't do that.
Well, I mean, it's a totally different engine.
Yeah, it would be a different engine. Never mind. I don't know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I once upon a time thought along those lines too, and then I realized. Then I started actually building something in a game engine. And I was like, oh, okay, that's like asking for like a C++ program to suddenly become a Java program.
Yeah,
could work, I guess. But
yeah, so that kind of sucks that that's going to be.
I mean,
if it's
the thing is that like I'll be maybe this is a hot take, but I want to see the universe through eyes that aren't the Capsuleers, right? Like, even the Dust Soldiers, like the Immortals, and like, there's so much about this sci-fi universe that we barely get to scratch on. There are trillions of people. There are 4 different, distinct, and incredibly detailed empires, dystopian empires. One of the things that struck me was during the Caldari video, like when they're all standing up and the planes are flying overhead, I suddenly for the first time it like clicked for me, and I had a sense of dread. It was like this is the evil empire. These are the stormtroopers. You know what I mean? This is like. We joke around, or not joke around, but we talk about how like they're an authoritarian meritocracy and they're xenophobic and all that stuff. But like, I didn't see the fascist in Caldari until that moment, and I was like, oh yeah, that's right. Under all of the corporate bullshit and who's rich and who's not, there is a lot of very loyal, militaristically formed people who think that they are both oppressed and important. So, that's kind of spooky. But you know what I mean? Like, I want to learn. I said this during the FanFest stuff, I think, or I've said this many times. It's like, I want to storm the fortresses of Skarkon. I want to walk the streets of Kali. I want the rain of Arturio to bead off of my suit of armor. You know what I mean? Like, I don't want more spaceship stuff. I mean, like, I like spaceship stuff. Don't get me wrong. I love the Eve stuff. But Eve's got that covered. I want a different perspective of the universe. I want to have my understandings of the universe subverted. You know,
Eve RPG
I want to
would
see
be a lot of fun. I think.
Yeah,
like,
I want to
You're not
play
playing
the LA.
Cavaliers. You're playing like the people that are just like
Yeah.
running around in this crazy universe that we have. Me and my friends were talking about like, why didn't Eve do a 4X strategy game? Like, it's already a 4X grand strategy game on like this massive.
Well, they're working on that.
level.
That's the mobile app that they talked about.
Oh.
Yeah.
Mobile app though.
I mean,
want my full
well,
PC.
let's be frank though. Like, especially if you're going to be doing a 4X strategy game, it makes sense to develop as a mobile app at this point.
Yeah, everything's going that way. It's just my phone is only going to hold so much crap, and
That's
I
fair.
only do so much with
So,
my phone at this point. Like, it's
to
one
Spike X
game.
Phil, well, you get a tablet. Spike X Phil points out that, like, well-trained military versus corrupt slavers. Yeah, but there's already plenty of depictions about like how spooky the Amar are. You know. Now all we need to do is have like a real depiction of the hedonistic nature of the Galente, right? Because like the Galente have only ever shown kind of the face that they want to show, the strength and the democracy and all that stuff. But like we need to like, they should have like had Empress, or not Empress, but Celis Agard like giving her speech, and then like switch back to diegetics to like hearing her saying it like over a loudspeaker, like pan out and like it's a bulletin board, and then it like pans down and like there's like a rave center and like people just like there's like call girls, it's like Cyberpunk 2077 and all that shit, like show off the fact that like they're putting forward this like really pristine, awesome like front face, but then the actual reality of it is this weird hedonistic almost Brave New World type control. That needs to happen. Mimitar can all be proud. The Mimitar trailer was fucking amazing.
Yeah,
they can eventually we'll have to deal with the fact that the Mimitar can't even support their own people, but that's what the Angel Cartel is for.
Awesome. So we talked a little bit about the ARC system. So this is going to be like the new way that they're sending up expansions now. They're not going to do what was it, quadrants that they were doing before, and and this is like arcs are the way that they get to an expansion, but they're going back to expansions. Is that am I interpreting that properly?
Yeah. The missing piece here though is that like, so the lore has always been part of features that are coming out, right? Like that's always been the case.
Yes. Yep.
But we get usually like, let's look at the compression example, right? We got an explanation as to why the compression changes happened. The Angel Cartel stole the compression technology from Ore Laboratories, and then they, it got out, right?
Yep.
Cool. Yep. That happened. We can explain it. But prior to that, we have dev blogs discussing how it was all going to go down and all that stuff. We didn't find out that we were getting compression through the event. The event came second. What they're saying is that now the first clues, the first announcement of new things coming will be in universe, right? Just like this pirate line. They've said nothing about this pirate faction line, but there's some pretty strong hints that we might be getting it. They've said nothing about replacing Aura, but there's some pretty strong hints that we're going to get it. And we'll see where it goes as we go. And here's the thing. In my opinion, there's two ways of looking. You can look at it like a gamer, and this is a game, in which case that sucks because I want to know what's happening in my game, and CCP works for me because I pay them money, and how dare you not like answer to your player base, blah blah blah. Or you can think, I want an immersive universe, and what's more immersive than feeling that all of the things that are happening, even the new features that are coming out, are emerging naturally out of the universe itself. That it's not like something is happening because CCP decides it does, and then like the universe figures out how to make it fit, but rather the universe, like the new technologies are really being invented, right? The and more importantly, we're able to control it. You know, what happens the very first time that players literally prevent a feature from being released? This goes back to the question of what would have happened to Pochvin if players had fortified every single system. And I seriously, sincerely believe that CCP would have looked at that and been, that's the most awesome thing that we could have ever not predicted, right?
Yes,
I think they would have ran with it. You have to, like, with that much of a like a force of will, you have to respect it. Like, I guess we're just gonna have to do something else with that plan, because
and they're going to try and predict what we're going to do, and they're going to try and slide things to a certain degree into their favor to ensure, I mean, it's their thing that they're kind of setting up here, but I think that there is room for that net, and that's one of the things that's got me super excited about, like, how they were talking about how faction warfare was one of the avenues that they're going to be introducing new items and new stuff, and if you don't, if you want these items, you're going to have to do stuff in order to actually participate and push for the new technologies, get the minerals that are needed or whatever.
So let's put this all together, okay?
Yep.
So don't think about necessarily what the conclusions are, because I'm just tying like lore stuff together too. So the Caldari start a campaign to take Intaki as a front line. So for the next 3 weeks, they need the system of Intaki and a few other systems to be held. There's special missions in order to escort forces onto and off of Intaki Prime as the looting of Intaki, you know, returns in force, more or less, right? And as that happens, if the Caldari are successful, then new and different expert systems are released, because now Lidai has managed to recover more of the Intaki technology off of the planet. But if that doesn't happen, if the Caldari fail to hold it, Lidai doesn't get the stuff. The Gallente hold it. Now the Gallente don't have any plans for it themselves, so it's just like, oh, I guess those expert systems don't get released. Maybe they'll come to that technology later.
Okay, yep.
But not now. That's the kind of things that I'm talking about.
Yep. No, exactly. And that's and they even said that, you know, it's sometimes like if they have a new module that they're trying to release and the players don't accomplish that goal, it's not necessarily that module will never be released. But it might be 5 months down the road now for that module, and that was something that we had it ready for you guys. You just didn't want it. Like,
let's make it more. Let's give a more realistic example, or more like halfway real example. The compression system again, right? We had to turn in scientists. There were 50 scientists, right?
Mm-hmm.
What if CCP had it triggered that as soon as 40 scientists were turned in, the compression technology was released? And then, but if after 2 months, they haven't gotten enough people, then it gets released anyways, right? Technology gets invented eventually anyways.
Right.
But, you know, maybe we can trigger it coming out now.
Yeah, I like the idea of us being able to speed up technology with actions that we're doing inside of the game, and that there's a possibility down the road that there will actually be new technologies being pushed out through the faction warfare for reasons of faction warfare, and using it as a test bed for some ideas of like capturing space and stuff.
Yeah, it's important. We need Intaki. Why? It's important. Why? Because it's important. It's actually important. Like, you know what I mean? Like, for X reason. I think that can be a really cool idea. And more importantly, as a person that tells the story of EVE Online, I've said this before. Like, this is when I used to talk about campaigns. I want it to be able to say, like, well, the players did this, and then that made the NPCs react to do it this way. But then when they put out this call, but then the players failed, which embarrassed this leader, which got them to be replaced, and then the new leader was far more militant and, you know, did this thing, and you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So now I literally can't tell the story of Eve without telling both the story of what the NPCs are doing and what the players are doing. That tells me that you're actually living in a living world, as opposed to a game with set dressing.
Right. Yeah. No, this is you're never gonna get anything like this out of World of Warcraft. Never.
Right. And I think that that's the fundamental difference between the sandbox and the theme park, and what I get upset when they think about it as being scripted, right? Because in World of Warcraft, like, Bolvar was always going to become the new Lich King. The only choice that you have is whether or not you witness the event.
Right.
It happens whether or not you're there. It happens whatever, you know, it doesn't matter. If nobody ever beat the Lich King, they still would have advanced the story, in theory. You know what I mean? But in Eve, you can have entities that want to do things, and as long as our interaction with it influences it for greater or for less, then that's good. And the thing that boggles my mind is, like, sure, yes, we're capsuleers, they're super cool, but, like, I think you're taking the space god thing a little bit too seriously if you think that these massive empires under the shadow of which we live wouldn't have the ability to push us around, wouldn't have the ability to change our lives through their own decisions, right? Like, the idea that the universe wouldn't push back at us. Like, what the hell are you even doing? Like, it's like the people that complain about gate camp, like the rats that are on gates. It's like, yeah, guess what? The Goressus want to protect their territory too, dude. Like, space is scary. Let's
Yeah, it's tough, man. Harden the fuck up, man. Yeah, no, I completely
stop
agree.
Surprise Pikachuing. Expect it. Plan for it. Be ready for it. Have a, you know, what are you gonna do about it? They're out there, man. They want to kill you.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I see a lot of really good stuff coming out down the road here. I'm really interested to see what they will be doing at the end of the year with this expansion. I'm really looking forward to seeing what arcs that they kind of put out for this, what little bits and pieces of the expansion kind of come out as we learn about them. And so yeah, I'm gonna be really having to dig into a lot of the lore here and stuff much more for this show, and trying to figure out what the hell's going on with this arc that's going to be happening. I know right now there's a big thing going on with the Deadless, right?
Deathless, yeah.
Deathless.
Yeah, let this be a call to arms. The previous arc, or the current arc, has already started. It started at least 3 months ago. We have several main characters now. Ezra Hogaitsu, I think, and then Zohar, Peacock, which is El Villari, I think, the Galente Senate dude, and of course now the Deathless. They've been very careful to establish these characters, and as I talked about earlier, they are, you know, this idea that CCP just kind of wings it, or there's no continuity to the lore. Like I said, I can now tell you, the Peacock, in one of the posts it says, you know, Sniffer says that the Peacock pulled off an operation on the FIO that the Black Eagles don't even know about, and the thing is that if you go back to that first reference of the Deathless, it's an FIO dossier that's being taken. So I can point to that and be like, I think that that's the operation that Peacock did.
Yep.
So, like, the pieces fit together, and they stretch from here to 2016 to 2008, you know, depending on whether or not you're talking about the Blood Raiders and their and the bombings and stuff. Like, this stuff has some real continuity to it, which means there's a lot to sift through, guys. Like, who knows who will have, like, the piece or the hint of the information. We're looking for reasons why the Deathless would be having a bandana with red and black skulls, or whether or not that has gone anywhere. Obviously, it doesn't have it in the video. The icon in the back of him is the snake, the Ouroboros snake with its own tail with a dot in the middle of it, which is technically like a corporation, just a generic corporate logo, but it might mean something to somewhere. We might need to keep an eye out for it. We need to, it would still be nice to know if we could figure out, who Sniffer is, but that might be a different thing. Tracing down any more connections between Intara Direct Action and some of these other groups. And now that, just like with the EOM thing, we now have to take this information and use it in context with some of the past information in order to try to sort out what's going on. But more importantly, every gate to the system of Castlemon has had a giant fleet of diamond Galente rats on it for the last 2 days, and it's getting bigger. And now they're finding them in D-scan range, like in safes. We have no idea what's happening. That's not the only one, but the only reports I've been having is Galente. The Galente have been building up their own defenses because of everything that's been going on with this. The Intaki are in chaos at the moment, because the El Valari is Intaki, I think it was. Plus, Intaki's already been delicately in the balance anyways with all of these peace talks, and this has basically shot that to hell. So the Galente appear to be preparing at least a defensive posture, but you can actually see them in space right now. And I don't know if there's anything more out there. So there are things to find, there are puzzles to figure out, and the pieces are already out there. I've put in a bunch of stuff on my lore panel, or on my lore guide, and if anybody has any other thoughts, I'm open to ideas.
And we'll get that in the show notes for everybody for sure too. Yeah, so yeah, I'm really looking forward to a lot that is said here with seeing what they're gonna do more with this. I feel like I'm one of the few people that came out of FanFest and being like, this is fucking awesome. I'm super excited to see what they're gonna be doing next. I don't know if even for me, I don't think they fulfilled the promise of like the biggest content update in the universe, that it will justify the $20 a month timestamp that they put in there, but I think that wasn't required for me. What was required was for them to bring out a bunch of stuff that said that we're actually going to be fucking doing shit with our game, and we want you to be part of that story.
I would argue that if they actually deliver on what they presented, like in total, like for realsies, then that will be the biggest. Then it will be true that this FanFest they announced the largest content update that they've had in a long time.
And that's the key, actually, is announce, because they didn't say that they were going to release the biggest content update that has ever been.
Yep. So, in essence, and that's not even like a technicality. That's just us misinterpreting things. Also, like the dude jumped on his day off without any warning. It wasn't like it was an official presser by CCP or anything like that. It was just, one guy trying to give us some sort of answers. And, that quote, by the way, is very out of context. We were talking, he was saying a lot of different stuff on that topic, talking about the causes of it, how much of a factor Russia was, etc. And that was just like, and he had already said that it was going to be a big content update or whatever, and it was like the second time he was saying something that he says that. So he's saying something with more confidence or whatever, but he's like, it was I think it will be the largest content update that we've announced in a long time. And so like, I don't know, man. I feel like there's a certain point where I feel bad for the dude, because like he didn't even do anything wrong. He's just being targeted and intentionally warped. It reminds me of like the CCP Rutati quote that everybody touts out, like moon mining is not a God-given right or whatever. Like, yeah, that's correct.
True. It's a true statement.
Like, but yeah, I don't know, man. Part of the thing is that I'm starting to get the feeling like we're getting to that threshold where it's no longer like okay to tolerate the toxicity of that level of bitter vet. I'm not talking about like an experienced guy who's played a lot in the game and is kind of, you know, like jaded. I'm talking about the people that have quit playing and are actively being disruptive in every panel or every place that they can be because they're angry at CCP or whatever. Or
No, that's a really good point. Is that you don't want to placate to your bitter vets. They're bitter vets, and they're bitter and they're done. And a lot of them are done with the game completely.
yeah, at this point, they're just trying to stop the enjoyment of people that are actually trying to enjoy it.
Now, your
like,
vets who have been here and they've been through stuff, you listen to them, and and a lot of them care about the game and stuff like that. I don't know. There is a big thing on Reddit, which is that a lot of those guys don't fucking play the game anymore, and that they're gonna jump on the bandwagon and upvote anything that says fuck CCP and downvote anything that says that CCP did a good job.
There's a difference between being a bitter vet and being like hostile, you know. I had a better point than that, but I missed it.
But yeah, so I think that there's a lot of like bullshit that's just kind of being thrown out around right now, that's just kind of trying to incite the masses, trying to just get people to like bitch up a stream, and it comes back to a lot of that stuff of like, oh, now this isn't a sandbox game because they're introducing ideas of arcs, like of creating a story, which they've already had stories going on. And it's like, I don't know, there's a lot of whining and crying out there. And to a lot of the people that are like, well, fuck faction warfare, I don't give a fuck about faction warfare, the point is that it's completely changing now. That it's not this niche fucking thing that has nothing to do with anything in the entire fucking universe except for to make money or find some fucking kills. We're on a whole new journey on like this. Anybody gets to be part of faction warfare. The allegiance system opens up the whole concept that everybody is going to be involved in. It's not really even faction warfare anymore. I feel like eventually they're going to change that name. They're just going to call it. Yeah, it's just like part of the whole fucking game now.
Well, I had a guy in my chat that just kept on saying like, well, you know, when we were talking about the faction warfare stuff, he's like, well, this is good, but it's not, it shouldn't be the biggest thing in FanFest. And the thing is that like, actually, this FanFest answered the question of, yeah, but what if it was?
Right.
You know,
this is introducing the whole concept that this is really fucking important, that it's going to be a huge change that's going to be coming to this thing that's going to involve everybody. This is how they're going to release new content. This is how they're going to play test new fucking ways of taking sovereignty. Which is a proper place to play test this shit. Like, well, so like
the way that the cynics or whatever would interpret it as is, the biggest thing that CCP has to talk about is a small thing. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas people that are dialed in or say the potential of this is interpreting it as faction warfare is being turned into a big thing.
Yes. Yep. Exactly. Yes, that's huge right there. There are people out there who are just like, oh, whatever, I don't fucking care about faction warfare. It's like, they're telling you why you should care about it now. We know that you didn't give a fuck about it before, but now you're gonna want to care about it. What is this ad? It's years out. Well, years. I would say that I really hope that this is going to come out in 2022. Like, this will be at the fourth quarter kind of stuff that that's the impression that they've given throughout this entire thing. But it also is going to be in work for years. Not just an impression.
It was explicit. Yeah. So what I think that what we're looking at is like the front lines, that kind of stuff. Those systems that make it happen are going to be this expansion. The 4 years, if you go back and actually watch, again, everything has to be taken in context, right? And so if you look and listen to what she's saying at that time, you can tell that she kind of shifts to like a technically kind of point of view. So I think that what she really meant by that was the idea that features are going to come through faction warfare, right? So the Living World team will still be working with faction warfare for the next couple of years, because faction warfare is going to be a component of how all of these other things that they're doing are going to be spun up and out, right?
Right.
So that's how Living Universe is going to be working on faction warfare for years. But the mechanic will change. The update, the shift over will likely happen at the winter expansion. Wars coming to the empires.
Yeah, I mean, so I would imagine the allegiance system, the front lines, the objectives and agendas for factions is all going to be coming out this year.
And new sites, new opportunities, and all the other stuff that entails. Yeah.
And
then before that, we're still going to have more about this smuggler faction, because you know what they're smuggling, right?
No, what are they smuggling?
Shit tons of weapons into the war zones.
Oh yeah, there we go. That's good.
That's what they've been doing. They've been smuggling arms and ammunition and drugs into Blackrise, Placid, and Solitude.
Interesting. Okay. So, yeah, I was
nobody seems to be asking that. Like, actually, no. One person has asked me that. What are they smuggling? I was like, guns,
ammunition, things for the war. That's great. No, that's
if you go back like for months, probably over a year, there's been all of these different things about like this pirates smuggling weapons into the war zone and all that stuff. And it seemed like it just was kind of emerging from the overall like growing hype. But the idea of like who is working with who and these different allegiances, this is actually why I started making that notion, was because like it was very obvious that the web of connections were shifting in the background, and I need to like start keeping track of it. And then this shows up, and I go, oh, okay, cool.
Yeah, I'm wondering maybe if
I got started.
I'm wondering if one of the things that they should have done at this FanFest was to be like, we're also going to change the name of Faction Warfare. And we're going to call this something different. We're evolving it into something new. Because that's what it feels like, is that this... Because, like, one of the things that they talked about were, like, pirate factions joining faction warfare. And when I think of that kind of stuff, I'm thinking, well, will they get their own war zone? And then will they have their own...
joining the allegiances.
Right, but that's the whole thing, is that really this is switching over to an allegiance system.
No, the allegiance system has a subcomponent, which is faction warfare.
Oh, okay.
Right? Because you can have an allegiance to a faction and be forwarding their objective without ever having to do like the mechanics that we currently consider to be faction warfare.
So you think so what you're saying is that there's like enlisting to be part of the militia, which will be different than just the allegiance system itself.
No, what I'm saying is, well, more or less, it's like I declare my allegiance to the Galente, and so as a Galente, I can gain Galente points by doing any of a number of things that change depending on what it is that they need done, but one or more of them will always be a go to this territory and fight for it kind of task, right? Which would be the faction warfare part. But you can do more than just faction warfare to forward the agenda of your organization. That's what I was saying. Like, you're right. The whole thing bleeds over each other. So calling this all faction warfare probably wasn't a really good idea. Living Universe actually is better of an idea to think about, but also probably far more abstract. What I think that they should have done, honestly, is like the lore has never mattered, or not mattered so much for so long, for so many people, that like you really need to show them what's going on. Like ultimately, people think that there's no content, even though they said why there's no content multiple times, because they don't understand how the lore this could ever possibly work out, right? Like, oh, this must be just a scripted event, or all that sort of stuff. So, and the idea, like, it's one thing to come on and be like, this arc has already started, and there's these puzzles. What they really should have done is they should have come out at like basically the climax of the arc. Right? Set it up so the arc climaxed right here. So that way you can be like, hey guys, this is what happened. These are the clues that we had in. This is what you figured out. This is what you didn't figure out. This is what we could have done. This is what we're doing from now on. So the next one's already started. Good luck. Like, had they done that, It would have been like, oh shit.
That's it right there. That's a really, that would have been a really good way of explaining, like, this is what you guys missed.
This is what's been going on under your nose. Not just a preview, because the problem is that we've had bad guys break into FanFest presentations before. So none of this actually raises to the point of being new and different. But if they basically said, this is what's been going on under your nose, and this is where we're going with this, and this is what this now means, then, give us a gimme.
Yeah. No, that would have been. I think that's a good way of kind of putting it, and that would have been a beautiful way to get some of this information dumped to us. But yeah, I think I do believe very strongly that this is a good turn for Eve. The direction that they're moving with what they talked about in FanFest really invigorates me, really gets me excited about what's going on in the universe that they're creating, not just what's happening out in 0.0, because I love and I will always be reading all the stuff that happens out in 0.0, but to be honest, no matter how much cool shit is like happening underground or in the lore of the empires, it doesn't draw me in. The game has never really drawn me into the empires and what the hell is going on there, and I would love to see that to be kind of more front and center. And it's improved over the years already, but I think this is like a big step forward.
Yeah, and the other side of the coin is that people have always asked, like, well, how can I get involved, right? How can I make a difference? How can I make my name be part of a story? If I write something, will it matter to anything or anything like that? Like, how does my personal RP become part of the story? And this makes a much more cleaner answer for that, right? It's no longer just, hey, join Electus Matari or Pi or Arc or whatever. You can engage. If the story has engagement points, then you can engage with it, which is pretty cool. As far as like renaming it though, I just thought about it. Like, what if the name of the entire system was just called Faction Allegiances, and the name of what we now think of as faction warfare, including the changes that she was discussing, is now just called Border Conflict?
Yeah, stuff like that. I think would be it's. I'm interested.
Just like Resource Wars became Mining Blitz,
So I didn't when originally, I had heard all this stuff, I didn't think about the Allegiance system being even bigger than what's already going on with faction warfare, and that makes a lot of sense. And I think that's going to be something that's really huge, and that's hopefully next FanFest, it won't be a faction warfare presentation. It'll be something else, but faction warfare will be part of that greater conversation. And I feel like that's one of the off-puts that they kind of had here, was just I feel like they used faction warfare to kind of like bridge everybody in, like to bring you from to give you grounding. But now, like, at a certain point, it's going to be like tethering to the past, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm.
So because shoot, I had something else I was going to say about that with allegiances. So one other thing to think about in this regard: CCP has been setting up 3 major conflicts. Right, on the Glente and Caldari side, we have the Intaki, the Ugalis, Preglar constellation stuff. That's cool. On the Amar side, we have Flosuswin, Aset, and the Ugidi constellation. Cool. So what happens when Tash Murkon invades Stain? Because they're ready to. They've made a pretty explicit point to be ready to. In fact, they're moving even more soldiers. They're taking soldiers out of Edencom in order to move more towards their front line so they can invade Stain. Sorum is going after the war zone. Tash Murkon has an eye for Stain. That's why the Stain Gate was built.
Oh yeah, no, that's a good point. That's some interesting stuff there. So, you thinking that there might actually be some like 0. or nullsec NPC space versus and pirates, basically, versus the empires that'll have a little bit more events that are going to be taking place in that area.
Yeah, what if...
And then allegiances can kind of go with that, and...
Right, what if the concept of war zones were eliminated? You just have systems that have sovereignty that can be attacked by another sovereign entity.
Right, whether it's NPC or PC.
Yeah. Well, I mean, within the NPCs particularly,
right.
But like player sovereignty. Probably keep the two separate for now.
Yeah.
I think that the players will kind of win.
No.
Well, no, I mean like when Sancha shows up to like start reinforcing all of fraternity structures, they'll be happy about that.
Yeah, we got to see a little bit of that. Back.
I mean, but yeah, like if Tash Murkon invades Stain, there's no reason why Stain wouldn't just become basically more faction warfare systems effective. It's just now the front. Remember, the rules are a front line is any system that's adjacent to an enemy, an opposing faction system.
Yeah, you could get really broad with that.
You could apply those rules to everything, everywhere. The whole world could just the whole universe. I'm not saying that they're going to, or anything. I don't want everybody to think pie in the sky, but I'm just saying like
this is and this goes along with like introducing pirates into faction warfare.
Right, exactly. It seems to me like they've set up the clear flashpoints for where they're going with this current thing, but they've already opened their door to their next to the experiment once they're ready to experiment with bringing in pirates, right? Because the first thing that would happen. So once you establish,
something that's likely not coming out this year. Like
right.
They mentioned it as like that was one of the ones that they were very clear that this is the teaser, but this is where it could easily go for us if we start with our 4 factions, 4 empires. They each get an allegiance system to them, and then we might bring in a pirate faction or 4 pirate factions and say, hey, here we are. You can now declare allegiance to them, and they also have space that they're trying and objectives that they are trying to achieve. Which already is kind of happening. Just you've got to build the system for it.
Right. So if I could just like guess blindly over a year before all this happens, or 6 months to a year before all this happens. So yeah, the Empire side of all of this comes out in Q4, right? We get factions, EVE Online factions, the name of the expansion, whatever. So cool, whole new ways of joining the empires. You can do all sorts of cool stuff, raising the ranks, gain cool stuff, get cool stuff to put on your stuff, get interbus points, build ships, let CCP sell them. It's a grand world for everybody. Once the war zone system and the allegiance system and all that stuff kind of shakes out and it proves that the faction warfare stuff is working out pretty good, then what you do is you make it so that now you can not only gain standings with the Triglavians, but you can actually join the Triglavian collective as a faction by swearing allegiance, but you cannot do this until you have 8.0 with the Triglavians.
Right, yeah, they don't need to put the restriction at 0.5 or whatever to...
And they add some new functions. If you're with a Triglavian, that makes it so that you can use Pochvan stations as if they were player stations, so that way it kind of makes up for the whole thing and rewards you for going native. Maybe even eventually you could enter into the Domain and Beyond, whatever as long as you have your allegiance. You've been allowed, you've been glorified, you've been accepted. There's a difference. You go on your journey, you go through you're proving, and now that you've got enough standings, you can now click, and now you are a Triglavian. Like you're loyal to the Triglavian collective. You're accepted into the Triglavian.
Yeah.
Cool. And then, of course, when they're ready to see how extensible their systems can be, then Sancha invades, or Tash Murkon invades Sancha. I'm going to need to poke my head outside because it's raining suddenly really hard and my son's outside.
No problem. I think we'll actually start wrapping it on up here. Is there... see here. I'm just trying to make sure there wasn't any other main thing that I wanted to point out here. I know that they said that immediately they didn't think that there was going to be a lot of changes to the plexing system itself.
Well, plexing's really good.
Yeah, and I kind of like it.
Like
where
one of the
it
best systems in the game. Although she did talk about the true novice flex, which I thought was a good one. That's one that's been really desired.
Yes, a true novice. I agree with that one right there, 100%. Like there should be a place where, you know, maybe it doesn't pay out the greatest, but there's a place for the lowest of low faction. You know, no factions, no nothing.
Well, actually, it's funny. She said pirate, no pirate frigates, which is a really important distinction. Because remember, Empire faction ships are what you get for faction warfare. So it would make sense for you to use Empire faction ships in Empire faction. So that makes it so that the Comet is like the coolest thing that you can bring into the Plex because there's no daredevils.
Yes.
Right?
Which is a little bit better, or is a lot better. Like the pirate ships smash novices right now. It's like no contest.
The scale from bottom to top is very, very high, whereas normal non-pirate faction and standard T1 are much more in line with each other.
Mm-hmm. I'm not as likely to run away from faction ships, depending on what I'm fit with and stuff like that. Almost any time that I see a pirate ship and I'm in a T1, I'm like, this ain't gonna work.
And if you notice in the events things, one of the things that they've been experimenting with a lot, or one of the things they've been doing a lot with, is tightly controlling what kinds of ships can go into different places to create different kinds of scenarios. And I think that's really good.
I think it would be really nice. I heard this one was to restrict like larges and stuff like that with you can't use smaller ships to get into them. You have to only use the bigger ships.
I don't know. I like the idea that you can, like, undefended, you can plex them with maybe the other thing was the idea of the battlefield sites, right?
Oh yeah.
She didn't talk about that, but it was a bullet point on the slide. You know, so you can imagine what that could entail. But also remember the idea that they were batting around about faction ships potentially having some sort of buff or advantage within their faction borders.
Yes, yeah, and that was creating more terrain and stuff like that, like especially like the command systems. I believe they were talking about having that be, you know, where you can get bonuses and stuff like that. There's by moving your front lines and stuff, that all creates different kind of, and I think that's sorry.
What I really like about that idea though is, like, you know, right now if we're a Galente faction warfare group and we fly Galente ships, why are we doing that? Well, for RP reasons. In the future, it's like, well, why are you doing that? Well, because we're fighting in Galente territory, and therefore our Galente faction ships have an advantage, and we know how to take advantage of it, and therefore we, you know, specialize in this, and it has an actual logical reason why we would want to do that.
Yeah, no, that would be very nice.
It's just like the Triglavians, right? Like the thing I love about the Triglavian Collective and joining the Triglavian Collective is the fact that in order to work with them, you have to go native, right? Like, how do you gain standings with the Triglavians? Roaming around Pochvin and killing all of the bad guys that come in. What are you instructed to do? Defend Pochvin from all Posh-lost, you know, interlopers or whatever, right? So, like, you're doing exactly what they tell you to do, and you get rewarded for it. That makes sense. But more importantly, like, in Triglavian systems, they cut your locks in half. So, you can spider tank, but they're basically designed to go in packs of 3, right? So, Damoviks can have 5 locks at a time. Vedmax can have 6. So Vedmax cut in half is 3. So a pack of 3 Vedmax can each target the 2 others and then target their main target. So the cutting the locks in half that exists inside of Triglavian systems forces you to fight in groups and compositions and with techniques closer to the Triglavians, especially since they also come with a remote rep boost. So you want a remote rep, but you can't lock a bunch of targets. So you want to stay in small squads that you can lock each other with, like, squads of 3.
Yeah, no, that makes. I didn't even think about that. That's brilliant.
You filament out. You bring a filament with you. You filament home. If you get blown up, the person can loot the filament off your body. When we kill the Triglavians in invasions, we get T1 filaments off of them. Why? That's their ticket home.
Good point. Yeah, I love that. That's something I did not think about before.
Anything that can trick the player into making like real player decisions in play match like the role play that you're supposed to be doing, so to speak, if you buy into it, then the better. So yeah, if you're allegiant to the Gallente faction, you've got good standings to the Gallente faction, then be incentivized to use Gallente faction chips.
Yeah.
And feel rewarded when you do.
100%. No, that's the dream. And I mean, I have to say that we're closer to our dream than we've ever been before. Before FanFest, like every time that I said that they were going to do something in Update Faction Warfare, everybody was like, yeah, they've been saying that for how many years now? They've never actually done anything, and they'll never do anything. And if they do, it's going to suck. And everything that I've seen so far is like, they're going to do it, and it's going to be cool.
Right, exactly. And I think that that's a big piece to this, which is that like a lot of the people don't see its potential or don't believe in it, because like in a very real way, these are the dreams, right? CCP Aurora did go on stage and say all of the correct words, right? Like this is in a very real way, a lot of it was like if the players themselves had written these discussions. However, like such a monumental shot requires some imagination and vision, or if you lack that, at least trust. And right now the player base doesn't have either. Yeah. And that makes sense. It's okay. You know what? It's okay. If they don't want to believe in it, that's fine. If they don't want to pay for it, that's fine. Like, please don't. If you don't like the game, don't pay for it. Nobody's asking you to.
Yeah, I loved your tweet that was, I'll compile all of the statistics and information, give me all of your ISK, and we will get that forwarded over to CCP for analysis.
Right away.
Right away, and that's...
Chip chop.
Yeah, a lot of this, we're just going to quit the game now, we don't, they didn't give us what I wanted specifically. It's a little childish on the, why are you playing this game? Like, what? I mean, especially for people like me, I've been playing for 15 years, and, there's a lot of reasons why I play this game, and CCP has not ever actually taken away any of my reasons for wanting to play this game. And it's usually much more about the epic scope of what the hell is going on, that it's spaceships, and the way that I like the gameplay, the PvP makes my fucking heart race. There's a really special uniqueness that there is to EVE that I think a lot of people that are just like, well, I'm just gonna quit now because they didn't release a big enough content update, are really don't get EVE at all. Yeah.
So there's a great quote by Yoshi P, the main vision behind Final Fantasy XIV. As everybody was waiting for Endwalker, the latest expansion, to come out, which did fabulously well, everybody's really excited about it. There was this big spike of new players that came into Final Fantasy from Asmongold and all that stuff. In fact, they gained more popularity before an expansion than after, than ever in their world. Before, it was absolutely absurd. But that meant that all of the content that they were working on, or that people had, was a year and a half old or more, with the promise of no new the new content is coming in a few months, And so it was asked of him, what do you want people to do who are waiting? What do you say to the people who are waiting that don't have anything else to do, that they've done the content, you're not giving them something to grind or whatever, And he goes, I want them to go play other games. right? Like if you're done with what we've provided and you liked it, then that's great. You know, if you're out of content, there's other games out there. They're fun too. And hopefully soon we'll come out with more content and you will like it and you'll come back and you'll play it as well. Like, it doesn't have to be that big of a deal, guys. Like, if you're upset, you don't want to play it, don't pay it. Even if you're not upset, you just don't want to pay it, don't play it. Don't pay it. You could be alpha, you could just check out for a little while. It'll still be here. And you know what? Someday they may come out with something that might impress you and you'll come back. Yeah. All right, great.
Yeah, I've had a lot of that in my life with Eve, where it's like, oh, I'm just going to take 3 months off because I'm not really doing anything and I got no reason to play right now, and I've got other real life things going on, so I'm going to go off and do that. And then, of course, something will happen to me and I'll be like, oh, I should play that game again. I remember all the good times.
But I will say this, Eve is hard. Eve is supposed to be a challenging game, and the universe isn't supposed to care about you. And if you came in after 2016, you came in when things were in absolute glut. It's not usually like that. So adjust your perceptions maybe when it comes to assessing your fun or work or whatever it is that you want to put into it. Because it is a game that does demand a real investment, but has real reward behind it.
Absolutely. So I think we'll go ahead and wrap that on up here. We got some really good talk in there about what's going to be going on, our visions, our ideas, our interpretations of everything. But we are still, 6 months-ish away from seeing all of this actually inside of the game. Well,
remember, the arc that we're on right now it'll dovetail into the Empire arc. But this arc that we're in could very well resolve sooner rather than later. So we could see like pirate faction line or other major changes. I mean, they have been making some pretty good patches and stuff recently. And we are going to get content and sites and stuff. The summer. So here's the thing about the summer. Most of the time, the summer, when it comes to events, only have the Empire's days, right? Federation Day, Liberation Day, Foundation Day, etc. Mm-hmm. So there's plenty of room for plenty of stuff to happen.
Yeah, no, that's the thing with arcs is that if at the very least it'll be a build up. So this is how we're gonna learn about all of this stuff. Like they gave us kind of like the expansion notes, at FanFest. It was like, here, this is what's going to be in the expansion, but how it actually actualizes into that, I think the arc will be giving a lot of that. So stay tuned. And yeah, it's not like these game things are only going to be happening when they release the expansion. The whole point of this is that it's all about build up and then having a climax. So before we wrap on up though, is there any give you just a time here to give any shout outs or any projects that you're working on, anything that you want people to go check out? Just a little spot for you.
Sure. I am a Twitch streamer, obviously. I talk about EVE Online and occasionally play it most weekdays from I think it's 2000 to 2200, somewhere in there. I don't know. I have it on my thing. And then I also have my YouTube, which is youtube.com/c/Ashterothi. The Twitch is twitch.tv/Ashterothi. And all my important stuff goes over there. I try to snip things up. You get long videos, you get short videos, you get highlights, you get funny stuff, you get serious stuff. You get educational stuff. I've got a 6-hour total video where I go over every single type of module in the game and discuss all those fitting considerations that you might have. Mm-hmm. I'm here to try to raise the overall literacy of EVE Online in the player base. So check out my stuff, share it with your friends, and all that kind of stuff. And I hope to see you in space.
Awesome. Well, thank you for showing up, man. It's been great to talk to you about all this. This has been the time that I've been waiting for, and I'm sure that we'll have you back on to talk a lot more about the lore of what's going on. I need to get much more of a lore master myself now that things are starting to heat up, and that there will be a bunch of lore that matters to faction warfare coming up.
We're all catching up.
Yeah. Thank you all for watching. If you're interested in joining the war effort, you can always put in an application to Aderon Robotics, or you can also join up with the Golden Age stories in-game. If you want to watch us live on Twitch, it's every Sunday, 2200 Eve time. That's 5 p.m. Central Time. And if you missed the show live, though, you can always catch us. We've got a podcast. That's the Federation Frontline Report. You can get that on Spotify, iTunes, all over the place. We also have our YouTube channel, Golden Age Stories. Go ahead and check that out in order to see. We've got all the interviews and videos up on there as well as just kind of cool things that we put out. If you do have news that you want us to talk about on the show, an after-action report, anything else, stories that you want us to tell, go ahead and send an email to Frozen Fallout in-game, or you can always email us at federationfrontlinereport@gmail.com. And thank you. Have a great night.
Ash out.